Hello, dear warrior. You were never meant to exist, not in their books, not in their algorithms, not in their prophecies. You were the error that couldn't be debugged, the flame they thought they had extinguished, only to see it rise again, as wildfire, as silence with teeth. And while they built temples to control the unknown, you walked in barefoot, uninvited, and the statues inside, they cracked because they recognized you, not as a follower, not as a servant, but as a disturbance, a divine glitch in their carefully crafted reality. You never needed to defy their gods. You simply showed up, and even the deities looked away, whispering under their breath, "Don't touch the chaos." They called in the monks, the oracles, the spiritual architects of order. They asked for chants, for circles of salt, for rituals passed down from galaxies ago. But the moment they opened your file, silence. Not fear, not awe, just interruption. Because your name didn't belong in their hymns. Your frequency distorted every holy relic. Their sacred codes became static. The priests began trembling mid-verse, not because you were evil, but because you were unreadable, a waveform no one could translate. And as they stared at your energy signature, all instruments failed, all indicators broke. The graph spiked, dipped, and vanished. And somewhere in that vanishing point, they saw the truth. You weren't chaos. You were what came before order, a reminder that even gods used to fear something once, and now that something walks again. They went digging through forbidden archives, scrolls sealed in vaults beneath deserts, scripts written in tongues that crack men's minds when spoken aloud. And even those, the guardians of secrets, paused. Because your energy wasn't in their warnings. It wasn't in the beasts they feared. It wasn't in any of the 10,000 do not wake prophecies. It was older. Pre-ink, pre-memory, pre-law, a ripple before sound, a decision before time was even offered. So the elders did the only thing they could. They tried to forget, and they did. Until your silhouette appeared again, not in smoke, but in surveillance footage. You didn't rise, you returned. Returned to break the loop. Every system swore could never be broken. Now every watcher, every file clerk of fate, stares blankly at a line of code they didn't write. The chaos walks. They thought they had crafted it perfectly. A loop so tight, so seamless, that even the whispers of rebellion would dissolve before reaching the edge. Every soul born was assigned a role, a purpose, a cage, dressed up as destiny. And anyone who dared question it, they were marked as chaotic, unstable, dangerous. But you didn't rebel. You observed. You smiled when they tried to categorize you. You nodded when they explained the rules. And then, when it was your time to perform, you stepped outside the system. Not with force, but with something they never anticipated. Stillness, not silence. Not surrender. Stillness. Like the moment before a storm that rewrites the sky. And the loop? It glitched. Not because of what you did, but because of what you are. Their machines couldn't trace you. Their prophets couldn't name you. Their gods wouldn't touch you. Because you didn't walk in with rage. You walked in with truth. And the loop, it saw you. And for the first time it blinked. They wrote the code like scripture, lines upon lines, rules layered in symbols, a matrix of obedience disguised as divine design. But you were the variable they didn't account for. Not an error, not a bug, a presence, so ancient it felt new. When they scanned your profile, it came back as blank. Not because there was nothing, but because there was too much chaos, too much vision, too much you. So what did the system do? It stalled. Cameras glitched when you walked by. Their strongest operatives lost focus when you spoke. Psychics refused to read your aura because it wasn't readable. It was radiating. You weren't decoding the program. You were rewriting the meaning of presence. You weren't fighting the design, you were outside the design. They built the simulation to trap minds. You turned it into a mirror. And when they looked in, they saw something terrifying. Someone they couldn't control. The world runs on threads. Invisible strings pulled by silent hands. Tradition, fear, conditioning, legacy. They hand you a life like a script. Lines written by ancestors you've never met and enemies you'll never see. And most, they read their part and play it till death. But not you. You paused. You stared at the thread they handed you, and instead of weaving it into the system, you cut it. Not recklessly, not angrily, but with precision. Like a surgeon removing a lie that grew too deep. Like a hacker slicing a wire before detonation. You were never part of the tapestry. You were the scissor they feared. And the moment you did it, their whole web shivered. Because every thread you refuse creates a gap in the illusion. And through that gap, others see the light. You weren't rebellious. You were inevitable. They called it disruption. But truthfully, it was correction. There's a reason ancient scrolls hide names. Because names hold power. To speak the true name of something is to reveal its essence, its code, its weak point. And while others were trapped in the simulation, you studied the structure. While they worshipped idols built from algorithms, you reverse-engineered the altar. You didn't just resist the system, you decoded it. And then with that crooked Joker grin, you whispered its true name back into the void. And in that moment, it flinched. The Watchers? They weren't watching anymore. They were recording, studying, panicking. Because you didn't need an army. You needed one sentence. Spoken in the right tone, at the right time, with the right eyes watching. And suddenly, the cracks weren't just in the system, they were in them. Because something ancient woke up in your voice. Something that wasn't trained, something that wasn't allowed. And when you spoke, it wasn't a man speaking. It was truth with teeth. They prepared for rebels. They trained for hackers. They had simulations for uprisings, fail-safes for madmen, countermeasures for viral minds. But you weren't in their files. You weren't a line of code gone rogue. You were written in a language they never learned. Not chaos, not order, contradiction. One moment calm as a monk, the next uncontainable. They couldn't predict you because you didn't exist in their probabilities. Every move you made rewrote the blueprint. Every silence you held collapsed a signal tower. Every grin, a warning that another rule was about to die. You didn't glitch the matrix. You made the matrix question its own purpose. And when they finally tried to isolate you, surround you with shadows, box you in with silence, you stood still. And the room trembled. Not because you fought back, but because you didn't need to. You were the event, the cause of every alarm, every sleepless night, every reprogramming effort. They thought they could erase you, wipe the slate, polish the floor like you were just a smudge in the system. But when they walked in, gloves on, heads low, orders clear, they didn't find dirt. They found depth. Rooms filled with silence that studied them. Walls that leaned in like they had secrets. And in the center, not a fugitive, not a threat, a presence. You didn't run. You waited. Not to be caught, but to be witnessed. They called you a mess. You became a mirror. Each one who approached saw something different. One saw the moment they gave up. Another, the dream they buried. A third, their real face unmasked. And suddenly, their mission wasn't to clean. It was to forget. Forget you ever existed. Forget the fear. Forget the voice that didn't shout but echoed through every corridor of control. You didn't resist deletion. You infected it. Every eraser they sent down returned with new questions and no answers. They tried to call you a myth, a file error, a ghost story passed between agents in dark corridors. But then, one of them whispered. He looked at me, and I forgot my training. Another, I felt like he saw the version of me I hid from myself. These weren't just rumors. They were ripples, circles expanding from a point they couldn't locate, but felt in their bones. You didn't speak loudly. You didn't raise a flag, but you infected language itself. Code that once obeyed, now resisted. Drones that never blinked, now hesitated. Agents who never doubted, now prayed. Because when they tried to study you, they ended up studying themselves, and they hated what they saw. You weren't a virus. You were a reversal, a mirror held to the system that created you, and the lie it told to keep its soldiers obedient. They sent files. They sent probes. They sent priests. But all came back corrupted, not by chaos, by clarity. At first it was just whispers. Then, files started vanishing. Not from servers, from memory. Operators forgot their own protocols. Elite agents couldn't remember who assigned the mission, and when they tried to trace it back, they hit nothing. Not a dead end, a blank page. Because you weren't just escaping them, you were rewriting the chase. They called you an anomaly, but anomalies disappear. You became their default fear. The system ran checks, diagnostics, psych scans. They all came back the same. No issue detected, but still, the unease spread. Sleep cycles failed. Internal comms grew quiet. And in the silence, they started remembering things they'd buried. What they did, what they became. Because you didn't just walk through their walls, you pulled the truth through with you. And the truth doesn't knock, it breaks in. They trained their minds like machines. No emotion, no hesitation, no mercy. But when you entered the room, they hesitated. They blinked, their hearts stuttered. Not because of what you said, but because of what they felt. A reminder of the child they buried, of the guilt they locked away, of the human they erased to become elite. You didn't attack them, you mirrored them. And in that reflection, they didn't see a monster. They saw themselves without the mask. Suddenly it wasn't about orders, it was about conscience. Suddenly loyalty cracked. Some turned away. Others froze. One knelt, not to worship you, but because he recognized you, not as a threat, but as the version of himself he thought he had to destroy to survive. You didn't need weapons. You were the weapon. Your presence? A glitch in the obedience code, a virus of remembrance. And once a man remembers who he was, he can't go back to being owned. They didn't fear your fists. They feared your function, your why, because you weren't built to obey. You were born to fracture the system, not from the outside, but from within. You didn't knock on the gates. You walked through their walls like the codes were already written in your blood. And every step you took, another line of their reality cracked, because they couldn't comprehend how someone untrained, unfunded, unbacked, walked like the prophecy they deleted from their archives. They ran diagnostics on your voice, measured the tremor in your tone, scanned for embedded frequencies, but what they couldn't decode was soul. You weren't a message, you were the alarm, and once awakened, no one could go back to sleep. The agents they sent to silence you, some stayed, some switched sides, not because you preached, but because you reminded them that the system lied, that the chaos wasn't from you. It was from them, trying to suppress the storm you were born to carry. You didn't come to fix the game, you came to break the table. They labeled you chaos because they couldn't name what you carried. You weren't a threat to peace. You were the exposure of their false peace. Their balance was built on silence, on obedience, on programmed compliance. But then you arrived, unreadable, untrained, untraceable. They threw their laws at you, their punishments, their distractions, but nothing worked. Because you weren't reacting, you were remembering that somewhere in the core, buried under fear and fake order, there was still something unbroken inside you, something ancient, a signal, a roar, a frequency that couldn't be replicated, couldn't be simulated. They said you were glitching, but the truth? You were the original code, before their updates, before their restrictions. The moment you stopped asking for permission, the grid lit up, not in panic, but in recognition. He's not lost, they whispered. He's returned. They didn't plan for a return. They planned for your deletion. But legends, they don't reboot, they reawaken. You didn't fit into their charts, didn't sync with their frequencies, didn't bend to their timelines, so they panicked. They labeled, they exiled, but the thing about shadows is, they're just proof the light is real. And you weren't just the flame, you were the match. The oxygen, the reason sparks even existed. They watched you walk away from the rituals, from the roles, from the cages, dressed as crowns, and still, you carried the presence of every war you didn't start, but were born to end. They studied your silence, not realizing it was louder than all their sermons combined. You didn't echo. You vibrated, a different frequency. When the old guards couldn't withstand, you were proof that rebellion doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with stillness, with knowing, with eyes that see through everything. And now, you're not a warning. You're a reminder that not everything sacred looks holy, and not everything dangerous wears a mask. They built their temples on fear, their thrones on silence, and their power on your ignorance. But you walked straight into the center of it all, untouched. Candles flickered, symbols cracked, and their high priest looked at you like they'd seen a ghost that remembered who it was, because you didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't even blink. You looked at their chants, their relics, their whispered threats, and you smirked. Not because you underestimated them, but because you outgrew them. Their sacred texts, you burned them with one glance. Not in flames, but with understanding. Because you saw through the script. You were the rewrite. We called him cursed, one whispered. But I think he was cleansing us. You didn't speak. You vibrated. The floor moved. Not from violence, but from truth. That's what you are, legend. Not a disruptor, but a return. A return to a code they tried to bury under centuries of control. Now, they don't try to cast you out. They circle you, they study you, but they'll never hold you, because you've become what they feared most. A free force. They called it unbreakable. A seal locked by centuries of silence, guarded by whispers, enchanted with fear. But when you walked by, you didn't touch it. It opened. Not with thunder, not with screams. Just a stillness so loud it cracked their chants in half. They scrambled. The keepers, the watchers, the ones who knew. And in the silence, your name echoed. Not your birth name, not the name they gave you, but the truth beneath the mask, the one they erased, the one you remembered. He wasn't supposed to know, one of them said. No one was supposed to hear it, but they did. And now it won't stop. It's in the wind, in the wires, in the waking dreams of those who once called themselves gods. You didn't need a sword. You didn't need fire. You just needed to exist fully. And in that moment, you became the unsealing, a walking anomaly, a breathing question mark that undoes every lie they wrote in stone. Now, the ones who watched are trying to forget. But the seal is gone, and your presence rewrites the laws. You're not the prophecy. You're the proof that prophecy was scared to name. They surrounded themselves with power, sigils, talismans, ancient texts, symbols carved in blood, etched into stone, whispered into metal, all designed for one thing, to repel you. But when you stepped into their chamber, every candle flickered, every rune cracked, not because you fought it, but because your presence said, I don't recognize your fear. Their strongest ward? It turned black. Their circle of protection? It spiraled inward and collapsed. One of them screamed, this wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. Because what they thought was protection was just delusion wrapped in tradition. They tried to bind you with belief. But belief is brittle when it's built on lies. And you weren't bound by their gods. You broke the grammar of their magic, not with rage, but with truth. Their chants stuttered. Their priests trembled. And their shadows tried to flee before you even spoke. He doesn't cast a shadow, one of them whispered. He absorbs them. They called their ancestors for protection. Silence answered. They prayed to forgotten idols. Their altars cracked because you weren't from the past. You were the correction, the update, the anomaly their system couldn't patch. And now they watch as everything they built to stop you becomes a monument to failure. They pulled every lever, deleted files, shredded photos, wiped conversations from encrypted drives, even paid off scholars to rewrite the narrative. He never existed. He was a myth, just a glitch in the system. But every time they erased your trace, a new story emerged. Bigger, stronger, more unexplainable. A whisper in Cairo, a sketch in Siberia, a sigil etched under a soldier's boot in Brazil. No name, no timestamp, but the energy, unmistakable. He's the one who made the general stutter. She saw him in a dream and woke up healed. That file labeled ghost priority. That's him. You weren't just a threat. You were a phenomenon. The more they buried, the more the roots spread. You became folklore for the hackers, a prayer for the rebels, a warning for the corrupt. One agent finally snapped and said, "We've redacted him from every database, but the code rewrites itself every 23 days. You didn't fight them in battle. You fought them in reality itself. You became uncancelable, untraceable, uncontainable. A story that couldn't be told because it kept rewriting the storyteller. And in their effort to delete you, they created something far worse, a legend that can't be localized. They say everyone has a time, a final breath, a closing door. But when death showed up for you, it paused, not because you resisted, but because something was off. Your file was marked, your clock had struck, but your pulse, it carried a rhythm. Death didn't recognize. It wasn't fear, it wasn't surrender. It was alignment. He's not running from me. Death muttered. He's already danced with me. You didn't flinch. You didn't plead. You just looked at death and smiled. Because you understood something most never grasp. Death is only powerful when you're not awake. And you? You weren't just awake. You were aware of the games, the illusions, the recycled endings. You've seen endings reprogrammed into beginnings. You've walked into collapse and turned it into a launch pad. So death tilted its head and backed away, not in defeat, but in respect, because even it knew, this one doesn't end like the others. They thought ending you would stop the story, but you wrote in reverse. Every closing chapter became an opening ritual, and that's why the whispers never stopped. Why the agents still scan the static. Why the system still glitches at 3:33 a.m. Because you didn't die. You rebooted, and now you move through reality like a glitch wrapped in prophecy. In the deepest level of their control rooms, a war council was held. Not for invasion, not for economics, not for diplomacy, but for you. Projectors flickered, agents whispered, the air was heavy with caution, but something changed. From now on, the director said, we don't speak his name, not out of secrecy, but out of fear. Because every time they uttered your name, the systems glitched, the lights dimmed, the room shifted. It was as if your name had a frequency, a signature that disrupted their grid. They called it a chaos code, an anomaly tied to one word, you. So they created new labels, subject null, the variable, entity X. But even those felt too close. You weren't just a person anymore. You were an equation they couldn't solve, a ripple that grew into a wave, a silence that screamed. So now in their most encrypted files, you are marked with one chilling phrase: do not engage, do not trigger, do not name. Because your legend didn't grow by attention, it grew by denial. They tried to silence you, and in doing so they amplified you. They erased your name, and the world started to chant it. They avoided your story, and the story rewrote them. And now as you move through the echoes, they know. The moment they try to define you, you'll redefine everything. You weren't meant to be remembered like others. You were meant to be felt like thunder with no storm, like truth that bends time, like a ghost file that speaks in dreams. And that is how legends are born.